Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at Ghost 1.0. Now Ghost 1.0 was produced by the same design company as Unepic. And if you've seen my review of Unepic, you know that my final thoughts on it were that it's pretty much Unepic. And while Ghost 1.0 does tout itself to be a very different game than Unepic, it does have a few of those trends that certain players might really enjoy while other players just might wish they'd left them out. The overall story of Ghost 1.0 is that a couple of wealthy basement dwellers hired a ghost or some sort of ephemeral being that has the ability to possess robotic hosts. And while the general theme for this robotic femme fatale may be just far enough removed, it takes a lot of heavy inspiration from Ghost in the Shell, with the ghost being the avatar of an actual human brain that merely has the capability of possessing and inhabiting a robotic shell. The overall premise and generally light driving force behind the entirety of the game is that these two hackers have inserted an infiltrating ghost into a mega corporation that has designed the most advanced AI to date. As it is advanced and most likely has unlimited capabilities, they want it for themselves. And that alone should be the motivation to push you through about 13 hours of platforming gameplay. Much like the original release Unepic, all dialogue is fully voiced over. And while the quality of these voiceovers is generally pretty high, the constant interruption of gameplay to have a new story element injected does start to position the dialogue and story as more of a distraction than an enhancement. However, this is the most obvious in the first chapter of the game, so if you do manage to make it past the initial boss fight, the constant tutorials, reminders, and voice dialogue story plot devices do thin out just a little bit. The intended genre of the game is a Metroidvania RPG with certain roguelike elements. However, while the Metroidvania style genre is evidently clear, the RPG elements reside mainly in the injection of story into gameplay, as well as the use and manipulation of skill trees. The roguelike elements, though, are merely demonstrated through a checkpoint system which upon death causes you to lose a certain percentage of your items. Skills and abilities that you build up through gameplay you can keep through the entirety of the gameplay provided that you do recover them from your previous corpse. However, only a certain amount of weapon skills and items can be recovered from any given death. The weapons, items, skills, and upgrade system of the game is actually one of the more unique characteristics, and by looking at Unepic does seem to be one of the developer's strong points. Each category of item, skill, or ability is divided into its own window and contributes to your character in new and unique ways. Each can generally be purchased within several different shops in the game, or randomly dropped after completing an alarm event which consists mainly of wave enemy encounters, several of which can be encountered in any map and can be replayed multiple times. Though as alarm events are triggered, they get more difficult, and the more skills, items, and abilities you unlock, the more difficult enemies become. So while platforming through a level with multiple drones, shields, armor, and incredibly overpowered weapons might make you somewhat godlike if we were referring back to the original Metroid games, the consistent and equivalent enemy scaling keeps the game going at a standard rate. Additionally, the controls in Ghost 1.0 aren't exactly what you might expect. The character can only be moved with the left thumbstick, with their gun mainly being controlled by the right thumbstick. This is because the directional buttons or D-pad are linked to 4 selectable abilities. You can only quick map up to 4 at a time, and they can only be used once before needing to be recharged at a shop. This does make it incredibly convenient for picking up items or healing your health on the fly, but does mean that if you do typically play platformers with a D-pad, you're pretty much out of luck. Your primary and secondary weapons are mapped to the R and ZR buttons, while jumping and rolling are mapped to L and LZ. And while there wouldn't necessarily seem to be anything out of the ordinary about this button mapping, controlling your character's ability to move, jump, and dodge all with the left hand do create certain problems. In wave-style combat, where you're swarmed by multiple enemies, you will need to move, jump, and dodge all at the same time in a very rapid sequence. And since the buttons can't be remapped, this may cause a player to adapt their playstyle to the controller as opposed to adapting the controller to their playstyle. As previously mentioned, the voiceover and audio quality of the game is actually pretty high, but there is a bit of a repetition in the weapon sounds. And while the sounds aren't terrible, you may be turning down the audio for the weapons themselves because it can wear on you just a little bit. Overall, I'd have to say that Ghost 1.0 as a platformer that lasts between 13 and 16 hours is really well suited to its price. But depending on what kind of gamer you are and what you want to get out of a game, there are certain elements of Ghost 1.0 that might rub you the wrong way. While it's always great to get an insight into the developers' lives through the way that they design their games, certain genre conventions are a little more rigid than others when it comes to consumers' expectations. But if you can make it past the first initial hour or so of gameplay where those initial tutorial bumps are lying in wait for you at every single possible turn, the rest of the game and its boss fights can be really enjoyable. So if you did actually enjoy the game Unepic, this is a much more highly polished version in a space setting. But if you're more a fan of classic style Metroidvanias with a lot less story interruption, even on sale for $5 or $6, you may consider the price to be a bit too high. Anyway, that about wraps up the review of the game Ghost 1.0. So if you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, feel free to throw me a like or a comment to show your support. And in all honesty, with this game in particular, I'd really love to know what you think about it. To me, I'm just not a huge fan of consistently interrupting gameplay with story, but maybe somebody out there really enjoys it. But anyway, there's always going to be new games to cover, so feel free to click that little bell icon when you subscribe for the latest content. But as always, this has been Budget Gamers, so thanks for watching.